everybody, and welcome to the April 2025 Q&A on moving to France. My name is Allison Grant Lounes. I am the creator of the relocation agency Your Transformation. We help people to get the right visa and do French admin for following their dream of living in France. We work primarily with individuals and families who are relocating either for retirement or who are going to be self-employed and set up businesses. And our goal is to work with you holistically on making sure that your visa and admin processes align with your long-term goals of staying in France and building a life here. I'm also the admin of the Americans in France group on Facebook. I'm the author of Foolproof French Visas, which is now in the 2024-2025 edition. It's the 5th edition of the book being published. It's available on Amazon in paperback and on our website as an ebook. And I host the podcast Profiles in Transformation, where I tell the stories of some of our clients and many other people who have made the move to France and what they like, what projects they work on, and how they came about building their lives here. The book is called Foolproof French Visas. And let me give you guys the link in the comments. So we have about an hour tonight. We have lots of questions to get through that everybody submitted in advance. I'm really looking forward to this Q&A. I do want to get started by telling you a little bit about the changeover in the US that's happening from VFS Global, the previous company, to the new company TLS Contact, and what that changeover is looking like, because a bunch of you asked questions about that. And it's been a little stressful, including for us, because we just had to make a bunch of visa appointments under this new system. So basically, if you're not already aware, the third-party company that processes visa appointments in the US is changing from the previous company VFS Global to the new company TLS Contact, and that change is happening on April 18th. So April 17th is the last day for appointments at VFS. April 18th is the first day for visa appointments with TLS Contact. Now, TLS Contact is the company that processes visa applications for France in the UK. So we already have experience with their UK offices, and so far things seem to be going pretty smoothly in the UK. They also handle a couple of countries in Africa, like they might do Algeria. I don't remember what other countries, but there's a few. So not totally inexperienced. I'm cautiously optimistic about the changeover. VFS was really quite terrible. They were not very well trained in the French visa types. They often didn't know what types of documents they were looking for. Their website was super glitchy. It used to take us sometimes multiple days to make appointments for people, especially if it was a family with multiple family members. And my least favorite part of their site was that if you had to if you entered all of the details for your family and then got to the last page and the calendar showed no appointments available, then you had to log out, try again 2 hours later, and meanwhile you couldn't save all of your details, so you had to enter it again every single time. Whereas the TLS website so far seems to be off to a better start. You can log in, save all of your information on all of your family members or group members that are traveling with you, and then once everybody is saved in there, then you can go and look at appointments. And if there's nothing available, you can still save all the information and come back to it later, which makes sense in 2025 that we are able to do things that way. So I found overall the process of making visa appointments for the ones that we've made with TLS to be relatively smooth. They only released appointments through the end of April so far, so we were able to make a couple of appointments for our clients for the end of April. But so far, May has not been open. So we have some appointments that we have not yet been able to make. Unfortunately, there seems to have been a rush on the appointments when the changeover was announced. It was only announced like the end of March. So there was not a lot of warning, and it seemed to cause a lot of people to jump on the appointments earlier than they might have otherwise, which means that a lot of people are waiting. A lot of people haven't been able to get appointments yet, and a lot of people are kind of worried, and including some of our clients who wanted appointments at the end of April were having to wait till new appointments release in May. That's just how it is. I would expect normally VFS used to release appointments around the middle of the month for the following month. I would expect that around like hopefully by the end of this week, TLS will release their May appointments, or at least the first half of May, because there doesn't seem to be much available right now. But it kind of remains to be seen how they're going to manage it and exactly how things will go. We have our first clients with appointments at TLS in San Francisco on the 28th and 29th. So we're not going to know a whole lot about how things are going to go until after that date. My one other concern that hopefully is unfounded is that when you submit your visa application online prior to making your appointment or around the time that you make your appointment, it gets sent to the previously VFS office where you would be having your appointment. And then the official or the agent would be able to pull it up and attach your biometrics, like your fingerprints and your photo during the appointment. Now, I hope that it will be a smooth transition and that TLS will be able to automatically access the applications for people whose appointments fall after April 18th, even if they were submitted before April 18th. Fingers crossed that that is how it works out. I will not know the answer to that question until probably April 28th when our first clients go to their appointments at TLS. So all of that to say, if you're struggling to make an appointment right now, it is not going to last. Usually summer is the busiest time of year for having an appointment. So if you are planning on moving to France over the summer or in September, then you do want to try to anticipate making the appointment. You want to be keeping an eye on when appointments are going to be released and making sure that you jump on an available time slot. We have a client who has a very specific date that she wants to have her appointment. So, you have to plan in advance and probably log in multiple times and hope that you're able to jump on it when appointments become available. We don't know how many appointments they'll have available compared to VFS. Hopefully they'll be able to have increased capacity over the summer. The final point is that a visa appointment with VFS costs about $27. A visa appointment with TLS costs 220 euros. So it's about $230 right now. So obviously costs 10 times as much. It is not great. However, I will suggest that the amount of struggle that making an appointment with VFS caused is greatly reduced with TLS. So I'm hoping that things are smoother and that the increased fee is worth it. All right, so that is my spiel on TLS. Again, if you're struggling to make an appointment, it's not you, it's them. Keep your eye on the appointments. You can have all of your information saved in there and check back regularly, which will hopefully be soon. And making appointments is not a standalone service that we offer, but we do it for our clients. Okay, so let's jump into the questions. All right, DeWade and Karen, reciprocal driver's license state. If we live in a non-reciprocal state like North Carolina and move to Michigan or Virginia or South Carolina, how long of residency is acceptable? We have read 3 to 6 months. A mailbox is not acceptable or ethical. Okay, so we have not had any issues with our clients who have gotten a driver's license from a different state, as long as that driver's license was received before the visa. So you want to make sure that you have a driver's license before you go, ideally before you go to your visa appointment, and typically plan a couple months out. Now, the thing about 6 months is the following, and this is where things get a little bit confusing and there's bad and confusing information on the internet. If you have a driver's license from a country where you do not have citizenship, like let's say we have several clients who live in Dubai or who live in the Emirates, and so they have Emirati licenses, okay? So in order to exchange those licenses for French licenses, they need to prove that they were legally resident in the Emirates, in Dubai, for at least 6 months. That's where the 6 months comes in. But because you are an American exchanging a license from a US state, They're not really looking at the 6 month issue and whether or not and how long you were legally living in that state. Okay, what they're looking for is that license valid? Was it valid prior to the visa appointment? And then you need to show multiple years of driving record. So you are going to have to show the driving record of your previous state. The final thing I want to point out is that this driver's license exchange process, you do not want to order your documents and you do not want to start it right away when you get to France. You're not going to wait too long because you definitely want it to go through before it's time to renew your visa. You don't want to put it through, in month 7 and then you're in the middle of your visa renewal. They come back to you and they say, "Hey, where's your new carte de séjour?" And you're like, "It's still processing and I can't send it to you." And then they close your file. And then it's a pain in the neck to appeal it. A driving record is from the DMV that states if you have any infractions, like if you got speeding tickets, if you have a DUI, anything like that would show up and will affect your points on the French license. So yeah, they're not looking at 6 months or anything like that. We've never had an issue with a client as long as the driver's license was issued before the visa. If you come to France with a visa and then you try to go back and exchange your license for a different state, it's not going to work. You're going to need about 7 years of driving in order to get at least 3, but ideally 7. 7 is the number of years that will get you like a good insurance rate for an experienced driver, but 3 years will get you out of the probationary license that they give to new drivers in France. Bradley, is it possible for retirees under the age of 60 to qualify for the VLS-TS, I assume you mean visitor visa, with only savings and investments, i.e., without Social Security or a pension? Yes, they are looking for about 1,500 euros per month in cash financial resources. So not something in stocks, but if it's passive rental income, if it's a dividend that you receive every month or every quarter that exceeds that amount, if you have cash savings, anything like that would qualify you for the visitor visa as long as you're not working. What are reliable information sources to estimate the cost of living in different cities and regions within France? That's really hard. The official statistics keepers of France is INSEE, INSEE, and they keep statistics on all kinds of stuff like cost of living, rents, electricity bills, things like that. The problem with predicting for a particular area is that one, as a non-French person who does not have an appropriate dossier, you're probably going to end up with an apartment or housing that's priced a little bit higher than like a French fonctionnaire with a CDI and several years of tax records would pay. The other thing is that it's hard to tell from place to place what the electricity and utility costs are going to be depending on the type of heating that things have. You could pay very low rent in an apartment in Paris that is relatively small, but then the problem is if you have electric heating, you're going to have a ginormous electricity bill. So there's a bunch of different factors. I would say for getting an idea of housing costs, you want to look at websites like Le Bon Coin and SoLoger and kind of take it from there. But it's going to be really hard to predict utilities because there's several different kinds and each is going to have a different type of cost. John, could I plan to build my specialty construction business augmenting short-term income by tutoring English? So those are two completely different things that you would not put into the same business plan. In terms of a construction business, construction is something that's highly regulated. We have a client who used to work in construction in the US, and we did a business plan for him to start a self-employment activity as a handyman. And as part of that process, one of the things we discussed with him and put in the business plan was the limit between these are the things that are authorized when you are a registered handyman, typically short-term jobs that take a couple of hours and that don't involve like a lot of heavy equipment versus anything that's construction that you would not be able to do because you're not certified and everything in France. You could certainly potentially go out and get those certifications, but it's probably going to take a couple of years. I think depending on the direction that you wanted to go for self-employment, either of those would be a possibility, but your business plan would have to be pretty carefully constructed. If the 30,000 euro investment is not a problem, should we register the French filiale instead and the contract work to me, the sole French employee? That's absolutely a possibility. We do a lot of talent passport business creation visas for people. And sorry guys, I'm gonna do the questions that were submitted in advance. So if you have questions that were not submitted from the form, I'm gonna close the chat so it doesn't distract me, but I might get to those at the end if I have time. So you can certainly register a French company as a subsidiary or a filiale, or you can register it completely separately from the US company. There's a couple different ways to do it, but again, it depends on what work are you going to legally be allowed to do and making sure that there's no, because that will be one of the things that they're looking at in your business plan is, are you planning to do stuff that you don't have licenses for? Okay, Melanie's question was about VFS appointments, and we already covered that. Angie's question was also about VFS appointments and not being able to contact VFS. I assume that TLS is not going to be any better in terms of being able to contact them. Okay, Grace, what happens if I apply for a long stay visa, receive it, and I go to France and have to come back to the States in 3 months to finish up legal matters? Can I stay a month or two if I have to and just go back on that visa? Okay, so there's no restriction in terms of traveling back and forth and outside of France in terms of your visa. They do overall want to see that you are spending the majority of your time in France because that's one of the expectations when you have a visa. The main concern that I have is in terms of validating your visa, you want to make sure that you validate your visa and have a long-term residential lease before you do too much traveling because that's going to take up a lot of time at the beginning. There, once you validate your visa, you're going to be invited in for the OFI medical visit, which you do not want to miss. If you have a different visa type, like if you're profession libérale, then you're going to be invited also for a certain number of integration days. You may have a French language test and mandatory French classes. And so there's going to be some natural restrictions on being able to travel back and forth because you do not want to miss these things or you're going to have problems renewing your visa. There's also when you are registering for the French healthcare system, one of the things they're looking at is that you have utilities in your name, and they're usually looking at your utility, like your electric bill, showing consumption. And what they want to see is that consumption is happening and that you are actually residing in the place that you say you're residing. So they don't want people, say that they're living in France and have a lease or have their name on an electric bill, but they're not actually living there because they're living somewhere else. And that is one of the things where statistics actually come into play. So it's the National Statistics Organization that is looking at, does this person's electricity, water, gas, whatever consumption match what we know about their family size and their home size and all of that. In this scenario, what should I accomplish? Okay, so I just said finding long-term accommodations. That's the most important thing, getting all the utilities in your name and of course validating your visa. All of that needs to be done within the first 3 months. At that point too, usually around the time that we're sending people CPAM applications for them to mail in, that's the time also where we start requesting their documentation for the driver's license exchange. Now again, the driver's license exchange, it has to be done within the first year. There's not necessarily a particular reason to like that would make you think, oh, I better do this now, except that sometimes it can take quite a long time to process. It often happens that we'll submit like 5 or 6 over the period of 2 months, and then we won't hear anything back on any of them. And then 3 months later, they will all get opened and taken care of on the same day. So it really depends on the prefecture and how they're working on those. But what you don't want to happen is you don't want to get to the end of your visa where your visa is being renewed and they come back and they say, okay, your visa is expiring in 2 weeks. Give us your updated visa or we're not going to process this because then it's a real pain in the butt. And we had that happen to one of our clients where we submitted it like month 4, where, 4 months after she arrived, maybe 5. And they sat on it for like 7 months. And then her visa was expired. We had done the renewal, but the one she had was expired. She didn't have her updated card yet. And we're still waiting to hear on how that one's going to go. Nelson, our daughter is 17. She has not had any French yet, but is interested in moving. We don't know the best situation to put her for school. We've read that state-supported private schools can be a good option. She does rowing as a sport. Oh, okay. I know who you are. So, yeah, we talked about Carcassonne, I think, didn't we? And I did look it up, and there is a rowing club in Carcassonne. So, a lot of times when we have clients who have older children who are nearing the end of high school, a lot of times what they'll do is they'll repeat their previous year. So, we had a client where, and you actually know this person, Nelson. They had their oldest daughter was had turned 18 and she had graduated high school, but the whole family moved to France together and she actually repeated her senior year. And then she did an intensive French language class. She already spoke pretty good French. She had taken it through high school and she was very, very bright and very good at French. So she did a year of high school and then she went to sort of a prepa, like a it was like a university program, but it was more of like the equivalent of a first year of a humanities degree where she took a bunch of different classes in humanities and social sciences to kind of figure out what she wanted to do next. So that program improved her French quite a bit and enabled her to have an extra year to figure out what she was going to do in the French system. And she then transitioned to a student visa. So unfortunately, if you're here, if the parents are not, if the parents move to France and the kid is like 17 or 18, then it's pretty tricky to get them a family visa or anything like that after they turn 18. But they can get a student visa if they continue to enroll in school and then eventually get a degree, get a job, etc. As long as they stay. But if they go back, they would have to start over to come back to France. We would like to open an artist residency in France and focus on writing and culinary arts. We've already had a discussion with one consultant who helps people start businesses in France. Yeah, so we do several types of things. We do the profession artistique. We do profession libérale, which is more like self-employment. For yours, I can't totally say without having a conversation with you, but I would suspect that the best option is going to be passport talent entrepreneur, setting up a company to run the residency because I would suspect that there are a lot of expenses related to it because of the type of business that that's going to be. And that would require either a master's degree or 5 years of professional experience, and it would require a 30,000 euro investment in the startup capital of the company. So, not necessarily your only visa option. It would depend a little bit on other factors that I'd like to discuss in a conversation with you, but I'm leaning away from profession artistique because typically when you are on a profession artistique visa, the primary means of income for that visa has to be related to the sale of art. So if you are making the majority of your income from like teaching art, that would be profession libérale. If you're making the majority of your income from selling your paintings and then you also teach art on the side, that could be profession artistique. So when you're thinking about these different business visa types, you have to think a little bit about what your main sources of income are going to be and how it's going to be structured in order to make sure you choose the right type. I'm going to put, if you do want a 1 hour consultation with me, I am going to put the link in the chat to my calendar. I don't have any availability for like the next week. We're going to the UK at the end of the week for the French property show in Cheltenham at the race course. But the 1 hour consultation is a really good way to just meet with me, ask all of your questions individually, and to discuss your specific situation, maybe your specific business, your specific timeline, and figure out the best visa type, the best timeline, the best path forward for you. All right, Allison in Paris. In order to qualify for a passport talent wanting to work as a self-employed musician and teacher, is there a minimum amount of savings I need to show? Yeah, so what they're looking for this would be an example probably of the profession artistique if you're primarily making money through performing music or being in various musical groups. In that case, what they're looking for the artist visa is 70% of minimum wage. Minimum wage right now is 1,800 euros per month. So I can't tell you off the top of my head what 70% of that is, but you can do the math. But ideally, honestly, for most people right now, I am recommending that everybody have the minimum for the visitor visa. The visitor visa minimum of 1,500 per month times 12 is what they're looking for when you are not working at all. So that is a really safe amount to have in your account, regardless of what visa type you have. So it comes out to about 17,000, the equivalent of about 17,000 euros. Not necessarily, like they can certainly be more lenient for certain visa types if you are working right away, especially if you have salary, especially if you already have contracts for future work for your project, then they can adjust and go below that. Also, if you own property where you're going to be staying, they can take that into account when they're evaluating your finances. But really, I would want most people to have very close to that amount in the current circumstances where things are a little bit more difficult. And do I need to have evidence, proof of income that I will have once living in France? Yes. So when you're applying for any type of self-employment visa, one of the things that they're going to look for in your application is what activities are you going to be doing to earn money once you arrive back in France. And that especially includes contacts with French musicians or people in France who are going to be your music students or things like that. So not just I will be earning money from somewhere, but specifically I will be earning money from French clients or French businesses or French activities in France. And then in addition, if you have other clients elsewhere or other students that you see online who will be continuing, like that's a bonus, but not necessarily it's not necessarily like sufficient for getting the visa. Leah, is it possible to work on the long-term visitor visa? No. No, it is not. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who tells you that it's possible. It doesn't matter where your clients are. It doesn't matter what country's bank account your income is going into. You are not allowed to work on a visitor visa. That's it. You are jeopardizing your visa and you're possibly committing tax fraud or tax evasion if you're doing that. The prefectures are really paying close attention. You are required to report your worldwide income to France when you reside in France. Now, for Americans, a lot of income types are not going to be counted. Like they're not going to be taxed in France anyway. But your earned income, your business income, your self-employment income, your salary, all of those things are taxable in France on the basis of the fact that you reside in France and are a French tax resident from the day that you arrive in France to reside. Do you foresee the French government making any visa limitations in the coming months for US citizens? I do not speculate, but I do not think that that's going to happen. Barbara, is Social Security taxed? Your Social Security is taxed in the US. It is not taxed in France. It is not subject to healthcare contribution calculations. How can I schedule a personal appointment with one of you while I'm in France? I have the link. If you would like to come into my office, I am in Paris. That's certainly a possibility. What I would suggest is you would still have to pay for the appointment, but then we can arrange by email for you to come into the office and, tell me your travel dates by email and I'll give you some time options. Usually Tuesday and Thursday afternoons are good for me in terms of meeting in my office. How is your company different than others? Okay, so my philosophy about moving to France is that this is not just like doing some admin for you, okay? It's a lot bigger than that. And there's a lot of stress that goes along with it. Even if you're not necessarily thinking you're going to be stressed out about it, believe me, you're going to be stressed about it. Where I really try to focus is a couple of areas. One, I want you to have a holistic plan where, you're making decisions about the French admin to do based on your long-term goals and based on the type of life that you want to have in France. It's really important not to just apply for the visitor visa because it's easiest and then figure out what you want to do later. And then, 2 years down the line, you're struggling to change your visa status because you have this opportunity, but you're not able to pursue it because it's taking forever to change your status. So we want to start as you mean to continue, and we're looking at your plan and your life and your goals on a holistic level. The other thing is that we've put together a ton of resources for our clients. So, not just on the things that we manage. So, we can handle certain things for you, like getting you onto the healthcare system, getting your driver's license exchanged, whatever. But there's also a lot of stuff that we can't do for you. Like, we can't take your pets to the vet for you. We can contact the town hall for you, but you still have to go there and sign the paperwork to enroll your kids in school. So, our work also is in creating these complementary resources and being available to you so that any questions that you have about things that we're not handling for you, we're able to answer. But then also that you're learning how things work in France. So we also have in our materials videos about, okay, this is how invoicing works in France for your self-employment. This is how you have to conceive of getting things done, because you can't just go out with a list of 8 things to do in a particular day and expect that everything's going to happen. And a lot of the adjustment period of getting ready or adjusting to living in France is not knowing how long things should take, feeling like you're doing something wrong because nothing's happening, things are taking longer than you thought, it's harder to make friends than you thought. And all of these things are causing stress for you because you don't know what you don't know. And so we really try to take the guesswork out of that and explain, not just do things for you in terms of the administration, but also explain how things work in France and help you to adapt through providing these materials, through talking with you about whatever might be stressing you out and making sure that you understand how things work and what the timeline is. Can't promise that it's going to be stress-free because it never is. Can't promise that you won't have any problems like it takes 3 months longer to, for them to process your driver's license exchange, because sometimes that just happens and it doesn't matter like how perfect your file is put together and that all of the documents were provided. Sometimes that's just how it is. But what we do want to tell you is that we are on your team. And when something like that happens, like we're going to be the ones to resolve it with you and to explain what's happening as we go. All right, another question about visa appointments that we've already talked about. Do you know of any reliable and not expensive baggage services that you can send suitcases ahead of your flight? Some people use U-Pack We Ship, others use Send My Bag. I haven't priced out either of them, but those are the two that people typically use for smaller amounts. Mo going to Po. My husband and I will be retiring and applying for long stay renewable visitor visas in about a year. I understand we have separate applications with each of us responsible for supplying all documents required. If we have one bank account shared, can we each utilize copies of that statement? Yes. It does not need to be twice as much as the minimum. It can be the same, like 20,000 euros. They expect that when you're a couple, you're going to be living together, you're going to be sharing rent expenses and things like that. So that's totally fine. We have about 1 million in assets. That is way more than you need. You need about 20,000 euros in cash. So the crux of this is, do I need to plan to sell the house prior to applying to have the proceeds liquid in a US bank account? So you do not need to sell your house for the purposes of having enough cash in the bank, because it sounds like you already have way more than the minimum cash required. However, you do want to sell your house prior to moving to France, because once it no longer becomes your primary residence, and if you become a tax resident and live in France for a while before you sell it, France could potentially want some of the capital gains on it. I would suggest selling your house before you move, especially if your house has significant value. I'm 65 and unable to find a resource to provide either vaccination records or a long-term birth certificate. I've applied for both through my state health department, but have not heard back. So for the birth certificate, you're going to go to your state's vital records. And I think there's actually, it's vitalcheck.com is typically has things for every state. You can also just contact like the Secretary of State's office or the Department of Vital Records in your state. It should be relatively straightforward to get a copy of your birth certificate. For vaccination records, probably nobody cares. When you're coming from the US, they will ask about your vaccinations when you go to your OFI medical visit, when you go to your doctor, but it's more that they expect when you're American that you've had your required vaccinations as you go. They're pretty much going to take your word for it, and they'll probably just ask you if you need any boosters or anything like that. So as long as you have an idea of when your most recent, like tetanus, for example, vaccination was, things like that, having the actual record is not necessarily going to be very important. Gina, best way to find a rental coming over as retirees. Been reading it is best to use services. Yeah, so we work with a rental real estate agent who finds rentals for our clients. She is great. It's really hard to find a rental on your own. One, because there's a lot of scams. Two, because there's a lot of places that they're never going to consider your application because you're not the ideal French applicant. And so this person is really able to communicate well with rental agencies and find the apartments that are willing to accept your foreign dossier. So I would say we put all of our clients in contact with her usually around a month or two before they are going to be feet on the ground in France. But normally, what we advise is Airbnb or some type of short term rental for the first 4 to 6 weeks. And then once you arrive, then working with her to find a long term place. Paperwork needed for my husband to move abroad with me. How soon before moving do we need to apply for a spousal visa? So, assuming that you are French and that he is the spouse of a French citizen, you would need to make sure first that your marriage is registered in France and you have the livret de famille and you have an updated, less than 3 months old copy of the transcription of the marriage certificate from the Service d'État Civil in Nantes. That can be ordered online. Once you have that, the rest of the paperwork is really straightforward and you can do it within a month, 6 weeks before you plan to arrive in France. But if you haven't registered the marriage yet, you want to do it now because it can take probably about 2 months, maybe even a little bit longer, depending on what their capacity is. Kate, can you recommend the name of a bank for foreigners? Okay, so any bank will take foreigners. It really depends a little bit on your circumstances, whether or not you have a business, whether or not you rent or own property, and what type of visa you have. So, in order to open a bank account in France, you need to have an economic tie to France, which typically means you own property, you have a business, or you have a tax number and you're here with a long term visa. So, in all of these cases, we're working with our clients. We typically work with AXA Bank. There's an international agency where they all speak English. They're really lovely. We work quite closely with them for a lot of our clients on banking and on insurance. And yeah, first we make sure you meet the criteria and then we send you on to them when the time is right. Can you recommend a relocation specialist for Nice? If you mean finding real estate, we have French Riviera house hunting services that we work with quite closely for our clients relocating to the Riviera. They're really good. They know the Nice market quite well. The Nice market is really difficult and tight, so you definitely want to work with somebody who knows Nice particularly well. We do have the other apartment search service that we use that operates pretty much all over France. They do things remotely. But for Nice specifically, I would say you want to use somebody who's Nice focused and not necessarily everywhere. Karen, I'm waiting to hear back from my talent passport artistique from the consulate. I put down on my application more than 1 year. I understand I will probably get a 1 year visa and will have to renew it at the end for a 4 year visa. Regardless, I've already booked a ticket to France. I bought a one-way ticket. Yes, that's okay. When you have a visa, you do not need a return ticket. Kate, what company do you recommend for getting renter's insurance? Again, we typically send our clients to AXA for insurance. But I mean, usually we recommend getting at least a couple of quotes. We always, for the health insurance especially, we always get usually at least two quotes, sometimes three, to make sure that you're getting a good deal. Rini, does France allow dual citizenship? Yes. France does not care if you have other citizenship. What taxes will I have to pay? That depends on the type of income you have. I'm going to do a French tax workshop on, I think, May 13th. I want to say it's Tuesday, May 13th, where we're going to go through a basic French tax declaration. If your main sources of income are Social Security or pension, basic salary, auto entrepreneur, rental income, interest and dividends, then you can come to our French tax workshop. We'll be able to cover your tax situation. If you have a situation that's a little bit more complicated than that, I'm doing a webinar with Isaac Bashisha, our accountant of Mosso CPA. That's tomorrow at 3 p.m. France time. The replay will be available, but you'd probably want to hire a professional for a situation more complicated than the items that I just said. Keith, I know we have to show passive income like pensions for the visa. We won't know how much either one of us is going to get in our pensions until we retire. We expect them to be 85 to 95,000 per year with letters from our employee pension management company stating how much our pensions per year suffice for the visa. Yes, and presumably you also have more than sufficient cash resources. I would always recommend showing your bank statements as well. And if you have about 20,000 euros in cash, then they may or may not care about the pension statements too. In the past, you said not to take a car from the US to France. I stand by that opinion. I am not changing that opinion. There is a long paragraph about it. Do not try to import your car to France. Do not do it. They are not compatible. It's going to cost you multiple thousands of euros to potentially not even get it conform. If your car has a European Union certificate of conformity that you can get from the manufacturer, then you can import your car to France and make slight changes. If you don't have a certificate of conformity, don't don't import your car. If you have a UK car, if you're in the UK, I don't know if there are people from the UK watching today, then you're fine. Not fine. There'll still be some modifications to make, but you can import your car. But for Americans, absolutely no way. Trevor, you should be able to turn on captions so that there's closed captioning under my face. There's a lot of people here who submitted multiple sets of questions. The idea is that there's a 2 question limit per person. So I'm going to skip over some of these and we'll get back to them if we have time, but we only have 10 minutes left and I'm not quite through yet. For proof of income, is it possible to just use savings? Yes. Okay, there's another question about official pension statement for future passive income acceptable. Absolutely. It doesn't matter if your current income going into your bank account does not totally reflect the income that you'll have at the time of your application. What account types are acceptable for the financial resources requirement? They want cash. Like they want to see like how much money did the stock market lose like in just the past couple of days? They want to see like actual cash that you can spend like right now. It's great that if you have investment accounts and things like that, but what they are most concerned about is, do you have money that you can use to buy a plane ticket and pay your living expenses and whatever if the stock market loses all of its value next week? There are not yet links to sign up for the tax webinars. It's going to be going out in the newsletter this week. We're working on setting them up, but they're going to be the 13th. We're going to do the French tax workshop on Tuesday, the 13th, and we're having an FBAR party. Come and do your FBAR and learn how to declare your foreign bank accounts. So French and European bank accounts in the US bank accounts, and potentially things like Wise and Revolut accounts, foreign accounts declared in France. So it'll be a whole fun tax week. More people not able to book an appointment. Got my appointment at the end of April. Cutting it close as my departure date is June 1st. That is not cutting it close. It is more than a full month away. Typically, most visas come back within about 7 to 10 days. So I'm not really concerned. In terms of health insurance for the visa, typically we always get at least AXA recommend for our clients. I've stopped giving out the link in here to request referrals because what's been happening is people have been requesting referrals when they intend to move like in 2 years, and then we send out the referrals and it wastes a lot of everybody's time because you don't need them yet. But if you do need a referral imminently, you can email us and we will happily introduce you, but we can't refer out for services that you're not going to need for like a year. Okay, is it necessary to involve a lawyer? Does it have to be submitted to the consulate of your region, or are there better venues? So you do not have to go to the VLS or the TLS center for your particular region. You can go to any TLS office anywhere in the US. So there are 10. There's Boston, New York, Washington, Atlanta, Miami, Houston, Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Seattle. So any of those you can go to, whatever is most convenient is totally fine. You do have to make sure you code your application to the correct visa center. It won't go to the correct place. And you do that when you first start filling out your application on the France Visas website. You do not need to use a lawyer for this. We are not lawyers, but we do complete relocation packages where we're handling your visa, your validation. If you're starting a business, we do the business plan. We help you register the business. If you're self-employed on an artist visa or a micro entrepreneur, we do it ourselves. If you are setting up an actual company, we have an attorney that we partner with who does specifically the legal parts related to writing the company articles of incorporation and registering the company, but we handle all of the admin. And we also do getting you on the French healthcare system and exchanging your driver's license if you are eligible. I'm going to put in the chat our proposal request form. So if you are thinking about working with us and want a proposal for what that would look like, the form is now in the chat. But basically, our relocation packages include all of those things that I just mentioned, and also access to our resources. We have client orientation with videos on how we work. We have Fast Track to France, which guides you through all of the admin to do like before you leave, all of the papers to gather, items about understanding France and how things work, videos about, okay, if you're importing your belongings, if you are bringing your pets, if you're enrolling your children in school, what do those things look like? And then, like I said, we have different email sequences and materials that we're guiding you through every step when the time is right. So we manage on our internal system, like, okay, this person arrived in France on April 7th, so they need to apply for French healthcare, send their application on July 7th, so we need to get that to them in June, for example. And yeah, if you would like a proposal for working with us, you can fill out the proposal form there. Okay, what is the best way to compile a dossier for a 1-year visa? Any suggestions, recommendations, errors to avoid? Is it possible to be a digital nomad in France and still be on a path to citizenship? So if you are working in France, you need to be on a visa that enables you to work and be paying taxes and social charges on your employment in France. There's no such thing as a digital nomad visa for France. There's no such thing as working remotely on a visitor visa. You need to make sure that you have the visa type and the tax structure appropriate for your situation. And that's one of the things that we can help you do. Assuming that you are properly declaring your income and you have the correct visa type for your work situation, you are on the path to citizenship or long term residency after 5 years. You do need to make sure that you're learning French because the language requirements for applying for citizenship are increasing this year. So you'll need a B2 level of French. If you're self employed, you need to make sure that you're earning more than minimum wage at least 3 years in a row before you apply for citizenship. So you want to make sure that your business activity is real, viable, and successful. Now, a note about path to citizenship if you are a visitor. One of the very common misconceptions that I see around the internet is, oh, if I get a visitor visa and live in France without working for 5 years, I'm all of a sudden going to get a 10-year card and be able to apply for naturalization. Well, not necessarily, for a couple of reasons. First of all, you want to make sure that you're filing your taxes every year on your worldwide income as a resident of France. A lot of people get to the point of being able to request that 10-year card and oops, they didn't know they were French tax residents and they never filed their taxes. Well, that's a big problem. The other thing is you will obviously need to have a French language level of at least B1 for the 10-year resident card. Now, the other thing that's a little bit trickier is the 10-year card is very much at the discretion of the prefecture, and they don't necessarily have a good reason to give you a 10-year card that would enable you to work if you're just a visitor and you're surviving off of your resources. First of all, at the discretion of the prefecture and not a guarantee. I know of a mother and a daughter where the mother was retired and had pension income, and the daughter was, I don't know, like in her 20s or something, but did not have income and was engaged not to work. And so they thought that, oh, after 5 years, they're both going to get 10-year cards and the daughter is going to be able to get a job. Well, that's not what happened because what would happen is if the daughter suddenly got a 10-year card, she would be eligible to apply for all kinds of benefits for being low income. And so it does not work as planned to get a resident card, especially if you are of working age and they think that you're trying to game the system a little bit. So you want to make sure that if you are not done with working, you have an idea for how you're going to be able to make a living in France and what your different options are for changing your visa status at some point. And in terms of citizenship, even if you are retired, the tax treaty between France and the US is great on the one hand because you have so many advantages in that pensions, interest, dividends, capital gains, rental income on US or US based property, all of that continues to get taxed in the US. But what does that mean? It means that even if you're retired and you have 100,000 euros a year in income, you're probably not paying very much French tax. So even though you can show on paper that you are financially, assuming that you've been filing your taxes, that you are financially independent, you haven't really been contributing to the system. And that can, it doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily a deal breaker, but it can be. It can be. So even people, I used to I did taxes temporarily, like very temporarily for about 2 years in a US CPA firm about a dozen years ago when I first finished my degree. And one of the things that we noticed, a lot of people who work for international organizations like UNICEF, OECD, things like that, they ended up with salaries that were not taxable in France and they had a special visa status. And what happened? Most of them could not qualify for French citizenship and they were not getting accepted if they tried to apply. So you have to be really careful and really think far in advance about what you want your situation to be and what pitfalls you might come across if you, depending on what visa type. So I would say you want to look at foolproof French visas to fully understand the different ramifications of different visa types and how your path to long-term residency or citizenship might depend based on what type of visa you get. So I'm going to go ahead and give you guys that link again to foolproof French visas, and then I have time for a couple more questions. I just want to point out too, you asked about involving a lawyer, and here's why I think using a lawyer is not a great idea. Lawyers typically are only involved in the visa and carte de séjour process. So what I've noticed is that actually, one, it's not the holistic plan your life and make sure all of your admin gets done service that we provide. But two, there's a lot of things that can happen because they're not seeing the potential consequences of other admin. So, for example, like there's an immigration lawyer that is very around the internet who claims that it is indeed possible to work remotely. And I know I've had conversations with him about the tax treaty. I know several accountants who have talked to him about the tax treaty, and he just, for whatever reason, does not believe it. So I don't know what to say about that. But, and my attitude about that is, well, maybe he just doesn't care because he's not going to be the one, he's not going to be the one doing the taxes. He's not going to be the one who has to fix any of that when there is a tax problem. They don't necessarily care if that screws up getting you on the French healthcare system. There's a lot of things where they're not doing the admin procedures that follow. So it kind of doesn't matter to them what gets messed up. Now, I'm not saying that everybody's like that, and I don't know what might get handled or not by some of these firms, but in a lot of cases it's very much one track mind where they're not thinking across all of the different options and what's going to get you to the best result that you want. All right, thanks for coming, guys. Some of you have to jump off. I'm going to scroll up to the top and see if there are any questions that I missed, and then we're going to wrap up for the evening. Okay, our VFS appointment in Seattle cost almost $500. It's one of their premier sites. Yeah, some of that site particularly was expensive. They had opened up a couple of other temporary places, but still, like for clients who were in Washington, it's still cheaper to go and pay extra for VFS than to take a flight to San Francisco or something. Eileen, once I get my long stay 12-month visitor visa, how long do I have to travel, move to France? So you're gonna put the start date on your visa application. When you fill out the visa application, it's going to ask you what day do you want to move to France. So if you tell it July 17th, 2025, then for assuming that your appointment is sometime in June or maybe even early July, you're going to get a visa that starts on July 17th, 2025. So what you want is you want your start date on your visa application, your temporary health insurance policy, and your housing reservation if you don't own property and you are staying in like an Airbnb or something for the first 4 to 6 weeks. You want those three things to line up and match the start date on your visa application. I'm not asking about the 3 months after. Oh, yeah, okay. Should I get the DMV driving records before going to France or will they email them to me? Usually you can download them off the internet or you can get them emailed to you. The driving records are one of the things that definitely have to be less than 3 months old when you apply for the driver's license exchange. So you don't want to get them before you come to France because then they will be expired and too old when you go to apply for your license. So what we do for our clients is when we're ready to start the driver's license exchange, we tell you, okay, order these documents. When you get them, we will look at them. We will make sure you have everything. Then we will send you to a certified translator to get everything translated together so that you get a little bit of a better rate for bulk translation, right? And then once everything is translated, that's when we go ahead and submit it. But if you try to get the documents too early, then they're not going to be valid by the time you submit the renewal. And yeah, if you haven't been in the state that issued your driver's license, if you've been there less than 3 years or potentially even less than 7 years, then we want the old driving record from the previous state as well. So you don't necessarily have to go back to when you first passed your driving test, although potentially sometimes they do come back and they ask, when did you first ever get your driving test? In which case, sometimes we have to say it was sometime in 1973, but they don't keep records for over 50 years. And they just have you sign a statement saying, yes, I passed my driving test on or around November 17th, 1973. And they take your word for it at that point. Although sometimes if you have multiple driving records, they'll say exchanged Connecticut license for Massachusetts license on April 12th, 2008. Then they're probably just going to put April 12th, 2008 on your new French license, but it doesn't matter because it's still not a temporary license. All right. Yeah, I see a couple of you have consultations scheduled, so that's great. I do have some more available, so please feel free to schedule. Yes, I'm told you have to actively contact SAPEM or PUMA to get onto the healthcare system. Yes, you do. So that's one of the things that we do for our clients, but they do not contact you. They don't know that you exist, and you have to put together a complete file. All right. Thank you so much for your presence this evening. The next Q&A is on Monday, May 5th. Same time, same place. And in the meantime, we have a couple of events that are going to be coming out. Tomorrow we have the French taxes for Americans in France with Isaac Bachishat of Monceau CPA. That's at 3 o'clock, and it's a double header. In the evening, we have a workshop called Get Organized, preparing documents, information, and paperwork for your loved ones before they need it. And this is with Robin Pendarriès. I'm in a couple of different groups with her. She is an ADHD coach and professional organizer who volunteers with Cancer Support France. So she created this checklist to pull together all of your vital information from anywhere outside of France, but also all of your documents inside of France, your pension statements, your pay slips, your passwords, your cell phone contracts, all of that, anything that your loved ones might need in case of an emergency or in case you are unable to tell them where your paperwork is. This is a fundraiser for Cancer Support France. So part of it's going to Robin to pay for the license for her checklist, and the rest is going to Cancer Support France, an English speaking organization that supports any English speakers in Ile-de-France with cancer and navigating the French medical system. Whew. I think that's it. Again, you can schedule a consultation with me. You can check out Foolproof French Visas for more guidance on the visa process. And I will give you one more time the form to fill out if you would like to request a proposal from us for the appropriate package. All right. Thank you so much for coming. Have a great rest of your day or evening, and I will see you on the next Q&A, hopefully at one of the events and hopefully on a personal consultation. Oh, my email is welcome@yourtransformation.com. And if you email us, we can send an introduction to the real estate search people that I discussed, to the healthcare, but just tell us when your move date is, because if your move date is 2026, we're going to wait until it gets a lot closer before we send the introductions because it's too early to work with most of these people. All right. Thank you so much. Have a good evening and see you next time. Bye.